sponsored by the Mellema program in Western American Studies and the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business. I'm Jason Stansberry. I teach in the business program here, and I'd like to introduce Reverend Dr. Bruce Baker, who's going to be our presenter this evening. Bruce is a successful technology entrepreneur in his own right. He holds degrees from Caltech, Stanford, Fuller Theological Seminary, and the University of St. Andrews. Bruce has spent time at Intel. He is co-founder of 4Pi Systems, holds 5 patents in 3D X-ray technology, and successfully sold 4Pi Systems to Hewlett-Packard after HP. He also spent some time at Microsoft, where he was general manager for research and development of handheld computer systems. Bruce also heeded a call to ministry after that successful tech career, attended Fuller Theological Seminary, and was ordained pastor in 2001, I believe. He has served as executive pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Bellevue, Washington, and as interim pastor twice at University Presbyterian Church in Seattle, Washington. He's currently on the business ethics faculty at Seattle Pacific University, and is an active contributor to the Center for Integrity in Business there. So we're very fortunate to have him all the way here in Grand Rapids speaking with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Bruce.
Well, thank you, Jason. I think your memory is better than mine. And you also reminded me that how easy it is to make one's business career sound more successful than it was. And I think we're getting a demonstration of that in some of our political debates these days. Everyone's a success, and yet we count our failures as the ones that guide us to the truth, don't we, so often? And it's true of Silicon Valley as well. We have lessons there that I think we can learn from, that we want to learn from. The whole world seems to want to learn from Silicon Valley. Look at it. England has Silicon Glen, Silicon Roundabout. Scotland has their own Silicon Glen. Berlin has Silicon Alley. New York City has Silicon Alley. Grand Rapids has Calvin College. And the whole world wants to do this magic thing that's happening in Silicon Valley. What is it? I want to know. I've been a part of it. It's been a part of my life. And I want to understand that better. And as Jason has hinted in my introduction, bit of my story is that I've come to the place where whatever I want to understand it theologically. And that's why I'm teaching ethics now in the university at SPU. I want to understand it theologically. What does a biblical understanding of reality, of human nature, of theological anthropology have to do with business and the way we run business? Now, Silicon Valley is decidedly not a religious mecca. We know that. It may consider itself a great spiritual place, and there's great spirituality there, no question. But we don't think of it as a religious guidepost for us. That's not my point. That's not my point at all. When I say I'm trying to understand the Silicon Valley phenomena from a theological point of view, literally that's what I mean. I'm trying to take a biblical understanding of reality and of human nature and see what lessons I can learn from the way that the innovation has come about. And what does this innovation teach us about ourselves? And what does it teach us about how to run a business and the way that we would like to run a business? And there's good lessons there. And of course, there's negative lessons also. We also discover idolatry. We discover, if you ask me, the Tower of Babel being built by some of these entrepreneurs. One of them named Mark Zuckerberg, in my view. The vision that some of the people are bringing is very idolatrous. So we can learn something from that as well. But I'm going to focus most of my talks not on the negative side, which we can find everywhere we look in human ventures, but I want to focus on what can we learn as positive takeaway lessons that help us know how to run a business the way we want to run it. So that's going to be my theme. And my thesis is that by applying this biblical lens to the matter, we will come away with some lessons that will help us know how to run businesses the way we want to run them. I want to start by just pointing out how the world is so interested in Silicon Valley, all you have to do is pick up a magazine or newspaper. This was just 2 months ago. The Empire of the Geeks. Notice the map of Silicon Valley, sort of the brain trust, and all the outlying areas. There's Uberville and so on, Apple, Chia, and so on. When you think about the number of companies that have come out of here, you know there's something magic going on there. There's some water on the brain there, I see. I just noticed that, but you know, it makes you think there's something in the water because this place keeps turning them out. I prefer to think there's something in the air. The air being more a word that conveys spirit. What is it about the spirit of the place? Well, here's another magazine. I just opened this up last week, and there it is, full page spread. Here's a company, in this case it's a hospital, but they're trying to advertise themselves as having captured the spirit of Silicon Valley. The biggest thing in their whole ad is Silicon Valley. There's something going on here. Now, for some of you who haven't been out there, I'll just point out geographically what we're talking about. That is the San Francisco Peninsula. And the little tip up there in the red square, you can see is San Francisco itself on the peninsula, with the Golden Gate Bridge going north out of San Francisco. Then just south of there is Silicon Valley, and the bottom of Silicon Valley there is San Jose, which is the biggest city in Silicon Valley. It stretches up to essentially the Stanford land tract, which is right there, and then north up into these other outlying communities. Stanford University has kind of been the center in terms of the intellectual capital. And if you look at the original land grant of Stanford University, that land there, 8,000 acres of land, has been the place which a lot of the technology sprung out of that launched Silicon Valley. That's what it looks like today. That's what it looked like in 1940. That is a 1940s postcard of Silicon Valley. Absolute garden spot. Right? It looks like paradise. Cherry, apricot, almond blossoms, plums, pears, you name it. Just pretty much every kind of fruit would grow there. And it was a botanical paradise. This is a picture in 1925, black and white photo. It's a panoramic view, which is the reason it's curved. But it's a big, like 180-degree spread view of orchards in Silicon Valley. And here's the fruit. These are prunes. Notice the name, Heart's Delight. Now, the name of Silicon Valley historically from this era, during the early 20th century, and even into the present day, I find people still using it anytime they refer to the culture, historical culture of Silicon Valley. The Valley of Heart's Delight. That's its name, the Valley of Heart's Delight. And it reminds me of the other biblical allusions about valleys. What I want to do then is focus on a bit of the history, which gets to the original companies. And I'd like to point out that it may seem odd at first to talk about high-tech business and biblical interpretation in the same sentence or the same talk. But I came across an interesting confirmation that maybe there's a reason to do that recently. There's another high-tech company that's actually located just down the street from my university named Amazon in Seattle. And they have this great product, which is a book reader, a Kindle book reader. Well, they've recently launched a new feature on the Kindle book reader. And what they do is they track underlining. So when I'm reading a book here on the device, I can underline passages and go back to remember them and so on. Well, what they did is they are now collecting all of the highlights that people make on their book readers, on their ebooks. And they're compiling that all in this huge database that you can access. So you can see what are the most underlined passages and the most underlined books. Now, all right, here's a quiz. What is the most underlined book of all time?
The Bible.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm in the right place. Okay, that's true. And that's true on the Kindle ebook reader as well. which you would hope it would be. It is. What is the number 2 most underlined book of all time on the book reader?
Das Kapital.
Oh, good guess. And any other guesses? Probably not. I never would have guessed. And I've read the book. I never would have guessed. This number 2 most underlined book of all time on the book readers is the biography of Steve Jobs. Yes. Can you believe it? Now, so maybe this thing about comparing the Bible and Silicon Valley isn't so far-fetched after all. Maybe a lot of people have been researching this talk. I don't know. But I think what people are looking at is they're looking for life lessons. Well, I mean, obviously, the Bible is the go-to place for that, isn't it? But people are also looking for life lessons from this amazing figure. And I have to say, I can't personally think of a bigger genius when it comes to product conceptualization and delivery as a product, an art form of creating a product than Steve Jobs. He has some gift in that area. He also had a lot of personality traits and I think business behaviors which I do not advocate and which I don't endorse and which I think are destructive and which I don't teach. And it's not a great model. We're not talking about the Messiah here, but we are talking about somebody who has had a huge impact on the way people use technology and the way people use their products. So I found that to be very interesting, and I'm going to continue to draw out lessons. And I'm going to go back to kind of the beginning, early days of Silicon Valley to do that. That'll be my starting point. I think, if you will, you'll find some very interesting parallels to the story of the Israelites, actually, and the Exodus. And you have to look at the history of Silicon Valley to figure that out. It's not clear. And here's what I'm getting at. In both stories, there is a fertile valley. A valley flowing with milk and honey in the promised land, and with apricots, cherries, and almonds in the valley of Heart's Delight. In both stories, there's a tribe of people on a mission, striking out into the unknown to fulfill their destiny and create a new society with new rules, and to do so seemingly against the odds, even with giants nearby who could squash them. It's true in both cases. In both cases, the tribes are refugees, breaking away from the dominant power structures of their origin, from Egypt and Pharaoh, obviously, and from the big company power East Coast elite of the Silicon Valley founders. That's a very interesting part of their history. Well, I'll say more about that. In both cases, the people are acting in faith. And in both cases, there is a visionary leader at the birth of the new order. Now, next quiz question. Can you guess who this visionary leader is? No, it's not Steve Jobs. It's not Steve Jobs. It's actually someone that Steve Jobs chose, smart guy that he was, smart guy, he chose as a mentor. By the way, if any of you want to take a clue right there, pick good mentors. Don't wait for them to pick you. Go pick them. And guess who this visionary leader is that I'm talking about?
Bob Noyce.
Who said Bob Noyce? Yeah, that's who I'm thinking of. Yeah, you recognized him. How many people? Probably not many people recognized him. Bob Noyce is the one closest to the camera. And to me, as I've studied this history, Bob Noyce is the figure that, I'm overreaching here, forgive me. I'm overreaching, but I'm going to compare him to Moses. Because a lot of reasons. There's something about his personality being very meek. There's definitely something about his vision and the tribe and the way that he led the people into this version of the promised land. There's a lot of parallels there. So I choose Bob Noyce and the traitorous eight, as they're known, pictured here, the traitorous eight, as my example of the parallels between the Exodus story and Silicon Valley. So this particular story begins in 1957. So in 1957, these 8 abandoned Fairchild Semiconductor. And that was the beginning of the beginning. So-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so, like we have in the narratives. The same thing happens in Silicon Valley. And you have Fairchild Semiconductor, which you could go back and say that was begat by Shockley, the Nobel Prize winner in electronics. But then that begat Fairchild, which begat the traitorous 8, because they basically were revolting and rebelling against Pharaoh. Shockley acted like a Pharaoh. He had a Pharaoh personality. They left from him. They broke out and went free and started their own company. And this became Intel. Intel turns out to be the parent of this huge progeny of generation after generation after generation of companies in Silicon Valley, down to the present day. There's some interesting family trees. You can get a poster that shows this traitorous 8 and then shows all the family trees branching out from them. So that's another reason why I choose them as my starting point. I could have chose other starting points, couldn't I? There's Bob Noyce. I could have chosen this place. After all, this has got a plaque on it from the state of California. This is the birthplace of Silicon Valley according to the state of California. You might recognize that. It's a garage. Whose garage is it? Yeah, it's Hewlett and Packard's garage. It's where Hewlett and Packard began by building their first oscilloscope in that garage. They developed it. And from thence, now 1938, they got together to do this in this garage. It's now designated a historical landmark. And from that came Hewlett Packard, another Silicon Valley legend, and a company that has a huge influence, and a company that is much admired for the HP way, for its ethos, its culture of treating people with respect, its culture of doing products because they're worth doing, not because they monetize somebody's money-making scheme, but because they solve a problem for a diagnostician or an engineer or someone that needs to get a job done with a computer. Great products, great people, I would say, paternal sort of flavor to the company of trying to take care of its people. It's been through waves of struggle and turmoil since Bill and Dave are no longer there. And you know, we've seen recent history to see how much trouble the company has had since they've left. But they had a huge impact on the culture. Why did I not choose them as my starting point for this story? Because there's something about the breaking out in fresh, new vision for doing something on your own and creating a new culture that the traitorous 8 embodied that I think is more the flavor of Silicon Valley than HP is. HP has gone on to be a huge, successful, important company, but they haven't spun off and created this huge progeny of growth that the traitorous 8 have. And I think there's something about the culture that we're going to discover, which is the reason I'm focusing on them. There's also the parallels with the Exodus story. Well, to go back to the traitorous 8 for a minute. They invested $3,500 of their own money in this risky venture of developing a new transistor technology. Now, this was based on unproven ideas, unproven scientific ideas about how it would work. And here's a real act of faith, of stepping out to invent something new. And this thing is the reason why people look at Silicon Valley, they want to copy it somehow, as though they could extract this, whatever the secret sauce is there. Is it the mixture of venture capital? Is it the intellectual capital of the university? Is it the combination of the legal structure and the opportunity, land or labor supply? Everyone's trying to figure out what is it so we can copy it wherever we live. And I don't think you can. I don't think it's a matter of separating out and abstracting these little things that you can copy. There's something about the whole spirit of the place, and that's why I keep coming back to focusing on the spirit, about what makes it so special. Well, the Fairchild semiconductor people, they're called the Fair Children. The Fair Children started up Fairchild Semiconductor, and since then, created 31 semiconductor firms in Silicon Valley in the 1960s alone. Out of them came 31 semiconductor firms. And pretty much all of them tracing their lineage to Fairchild. One of the first things I want to point out here in terms of a biblical example now. I believe that entrepreneurship displays and bears witness to something about the creativity in the Imago Dei. There's something about being made in the image of God which bestows creativity, and God uses that creativity in His creation to bring about economic shalom, to solve problems, to allow society to flourish. Human flourishing, to some extent, depends upon human creativity, which by God's grace is somehow in the Imago Dei in some mysterious way. I also even would take a little bit further step, and here I'm getting a little bit, I know where I'm getting on shaky ground. I get on shaky ground when I start to compare this human creativity to the creatio ex nihilo, the creation out of nothingness, which is the Genesis creation story. I know there's a difference, because when these scientists are turning sand into gold, really, that's what they're doing, right? That's why everybody wants to copy it. They want to be alchemists and turn sand into gold. Silicon is nothing but sand, the most common element on Earth. It really is. It's sand. And you turn it into this incredible wealth. You know, I know we're starting from God's creation when we do that. We're not creating something out of nothing. But here's the part that captures my imagination. When these entrepreneurs create something new, there is this magical, mystical, mysterious element, or whatever it is, of a speech act, of saying, let there be. There's some sort of faith embodied in someone who says, let it be so. There's some sort of faith in saying, here's our vision, my vision, our vision, for what we could do. We don't know how to do it, but we're going to figure it out. And we're going to need your help, and your help, and your help, and your help, and you're good at this, and you're good at this, and you're good at this. And together we'll figure out how to do that. And let's go. Who's with me? You know, and that's a sort of entrepreneurial event, which is, to me, very similar to a speech act of creation, of saying, this is what's going to happen. And somehow the pieces come together and it happens. And oftentimes it doesn't, right? We know that. Oftentimes it doesn't. But anyway, that's where I see the parallel in the creativity that God has bestowed on people. And I try to sum up this creativity in these 4 descriptors. If I compare it to the creativity of God, I would say these things are similar in comparison. Because Silicon Valley is about doing a new thing. First, innovation. Well, there's a clever inventiveness in the application of new technology. And the new technology I'm focusing on, as compared to other forms of creativity, we all know that everybody's creative every day. Creative with whatever, cooking or art, or how to fix an automobile, or how to get to school on time, or whatever. I mean, creativity is part of human life, but there's something about envisioning a new technology that never existed before. No one's ever done this before. There's something about that, and then cleverly bringing that technology to be, that is the common element here. Number 2 would be the intentionality. There's an intention. It's not, there's an intention in art too, isn't there? But yet, quite often that intention is one of communicating some feeling or experience or event that is meaningful to us. And that's meaningful. Yet, there's something in this intention which is meaningful in the sense that it's going to have a use to somebody else. Somebody else is going to be able to pick up that computer and use it for something. There's an intentionality to make something valuable to somebody else. And that's the part of it that I like to capture in entrepreneurship. So there's the inventiveness, which is the newness, the envisioning of something new, the innovation, and then there's the intention that this has to be something valuable to other people. That's what's going to make this worth doing. And then the third thing that identifies it is pragmatism. Not only that, But you have to get it done in a way that's going to be economically justifiable. I mean, it's one thing to invent a solution to a problem that nobody can afford to build, but you got to do it in a way that is pragmatic, that gets it done. And then finally, fourth, is that these inventions open up new possibilities that weren't anticipated. And I find that interesting also. Every time there's some new invention like the transistor, little did they know that the transistor was going to be used to blow out eardrums of people at rock concerts. And that was one of the first uses. So, I mean, little did they know that the cell phone was going to be used to call a driver, or that a drone was going to be used to deliver your package to your front door. I mean, whatever it is, no matter what the new technology is, it's opening up new opportunities that are beyond the capacity of the people who invented it in the first place. So those are the things that I think make the sort of Silicon Valley flavor of creativity and flavor of entrepreneurship special, and lessons we can learn from that. I also think this draws out it draws our attention to the aspect of human nature, which is, I could call homo innovaticus, the person as inventor, rather than homo economicus, economic person. I think inventiveness is really a truer description of our nature. I'd like to just share with you this description from Kevin Starr, who's probably the foremost historian of California, and he likes to describe it this way. He describes a communal belief in a vast and lavish future together with a dream of perpetual youth. He says that was what was at the core of Silicon Valley, where they thrived on an abiding sense that it had all happened here first, and it had changed the world. He describes it as an enchanted, transformed place, another part of the forest, Shakespearean in magic, resistant to replication. Here, in this crowded portion of the Coast of Dreams, that's his name for California, the Coast of Dreams, its housing prices soaring and its Porsche dealerships out of stock, had been nurtured not only the technology of the globe, but also a dream of endless youth and creativity. It was not about the money, nor was it about the fame. It was about the thing itself, the dream, the thrill, the rush of being wired, unquote, from Kevin Starr. Well, he's flowery language there, but he captures a flavor and spirit of it for sure. And it is about the dream. It's about, and what is the dream that has inspired these people? My experience, my study of it, it's really not the money. It's really not. It often looks like it's the money, and because money is such the power of our age, you can't help it. You can't help but see the money at work. You can't help but see how the money flows and how the power gets used and abused. You can't help but see the effect money has on people. You can't help but factor greed into the equation when people are aiming at making wealth off of their inventions. But in the first instance, that's not what's driving them. It's just not. I mean, even the guy, he's just been quoted recently. Oh, sorry for forgetting his name, but the guy who sold Minecraft, he's Swedish, right? He just sold Minecraft to Microsoft for $2 billion. That's crazy. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. He's publicly tweeting and confessing his soul about how unhappy he is. And I don't think he's just saying it. I think he's truly unhappy. He's an unhappy person. And he kind of regrets he ever did it, I think. Because it wasn't about the money. It was about doing something really cool that people had fun with. And that people enjoyed using. It's the same thing. I can even quote Steve Jobs on that. Steve said it wasn't about, he said the most valuable thing he did was building a great company. I mentioned to you that Steve sought out Bob Noyce. You know who else he sought out? He sought out Hewlett and Packard too. This is a quote, and if you want, even if you don't read the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson, that's another reason it's the most underlined book. It's one of the most sold books because it's really well written. Isaacson is such a great writer. But here's the thing that really sticks with me from reading that book. The last 4 pages of the book is written by Steve Jobs. Here's what happened. As Isaacson was the official biographer for Steve Jobs, Steve knew he was going to write a book after Steve died because he knew that death was coming soon. And Steve personally wrote a 4-page letter to Isaacson, which Isaacson then, after Steve died, put into the book as the epilogue. He actually gave Steve Jobs the last word in the book, in his own biography. And those last 4 pages to me are some of the most fascinating reading. And it's in those last 4 pages that Steve Jobs says this. He says, "I hate it when people call themselves entrepreneurs, when what they're really trying to do is launch a startup and then sell or go public so they can cash in and move on." He says, I hate it when people say that's entrepreneurship. They're unwilling to do the work it takes to build a real company, which is the hardest work in business. That's how you really make a contribution and add to the legacy of those who went before. You build a company that will stand for something a generation or 2 from now. That's what Walt Disney did. And Hewlett and Packard. And the people who built Intel. See, he names them all. They created a company to last, not to make money. That's what I want Apple to be. So these are his closing words. You find the same thing in many of the entrepreneurs that you can interview about why they've done what they've done. And the lasting legacy of having built a company where there's a culture, where that culture itself has value in itself, that's a real value. That's part of the mystique. That's part of what I want to, if the world were going to try to copy and take lessons out of Silicon Valley, that's the one I would want them to take. I wanted to figure out what are the good lessons about culture that matter and that promote human flourishing within the workplace, within the people, that inspires people to do great things. That's the part I want to learn how to go to school on that. And I do have some observations there. And this goes back to my original overreaching comparison when I overreached and I compared Bob Noyce to Moses. Well, look at, what does the Bible say about Moses? The most humble man on earth is the description. Noyce is described in his own way as being meek. And one of the biographers of Noyce would be Michael Malone, who's written a lot of books on Silicon Valley. He says this: in person, Noyce was not a commanding figure. He was a relatively small man with a rumbling voice and the compact build of an aging athlete. He was genial and unaffected, swore with care, and had a keen sense of irony that would result in a chuckle and crooked grin, like that of a mischievous schoolboy. The other thing I know about the culture of Intel and others like Hewlett Packard, you see, my life story sort of has passed in and out of Silicon Valley also. And for a short time, I was able to work at Intel. I worked at Intel while these guys were there, while Noyce and Andy Grove, and Gordon Moore, the Troika, those three. The Trinity. The Trinity. They really were. They had an office of the president. They had an office of the president, and all three of them were in it. And it was a company where it was the new culture. Open partitions. Nobody had an office. Nobody had a door that they could close. Not even the president. And it was just open space. And that was a new culture, the East Coast establishment with hired chauffeurs and taxis and the suits, as they call them. Well, I wore a tie, but that culture is not part of what they're doing. And it's part of that culture that is the mystique. The other thing that's interesting about Noyce is that he came out of Iowa. And I think there's something there. He came out of the town that was sort of a missionary city on a hill vision town in Iowa, founded by Josiah Grinnell. Now here's a name. Josiah Grinnell, this is part of the history, because he was the pastor to whom Horace Greeley uttered these famous words, "Go west, young man." This is Noyce's roots. It's coming out of the church and this vision of sort of being able to plunk down and have a culture that was based on biblical values. Now, I don't believe Noyce really carried the biblical faith with him. I don't find him to be a religious man, so that's not what was going on. But still, nonetheless, there seems to have been some sort of values, though, inculcated in him out of those Iowa roots that went with him when he started this company and tried to live by some of the same principles. I do think that's valid to say. And I do think that's part of the story. And if you want to read the best biography that's ever been written about this, read Tom Wolfe's short article or short biography of Bob Noyce and the founding of these companies. Tom Wolfe says that Grinnell's congregates opened up the virgin land in a common struggle out on the frontier. I think it's maybe not too unlike what's happened in these parts where we are today. They gave up the comforts of the East in order to create a city of light in the name of the Lord, unquote. They trusted not only in their strengths of faith, but also in the value of education, especially engineering. Noyce got one of the best possible engineering educations in the world in his day in Iowa. That was another reason that he emerged out of there and was able to do what he did. The emphasis on that type of education. And that has become a sort of a spiritual capital and an intellectual capital that helped to launch Silicon Valley. So if we want to replicate anything like it, wherever we live, we want to be doing something that replicates those values in the workplace, that replicates that understanding of what it means to be a community, and a community of work with shared values. We want to replicate those values of entrepreneurship and innovation. We also want to replicate the intellectual capital. And we want to treat intellectual capital like a resource for this type of creation. That one of the reasons that God gave us the ability to do science and this type of intellectual investigation is for the purpose of opening up new opportunities that we had not envisioned before. So I would just close for a minute, and we've got, doing okay on time, and we'll have time for Q&A. Are we okay? So I'll just close here then and share that a couple of last words from Steve Jobs. Since I've said, critical things about him, I want to give him the last word because there's a lot to admire there. Steve Jobs said, my passion has been to build an enduring company where people were motivated to make great products. Everything else was secondary. Sure, it was great to make a profit because that's what enabled you to make great products. But the products, not the profits, were the motivation. So there's some good closing words for us. I'll pause here and be thankful if you've got some things you want to discuss with me. Yeah.
Well, I'll ask
Yeah.
a question. So we've been hearing about culture and some positive things, human flourishing. Topically, we've been hearing about Amazon.
Yes.
And maybe things that we wouldn't necessarily consider human flourishing
Right.
going on there.
Absolutely right.
hard driving, and trying to solve problems, but maybe burning people out.
Yeah, yeah. Amazon is a great poster child for this problem of creating an environment in which people are sort of driven to burnout. And you can understand the reasons why. It is very productive for the company to get the most work out of people. Also, young, energetic people who have talent, have fun, and want to. I was one. I am. I geek, right? I mean, I was there. I was one of those people. And there's a thrill to being able to solve a really hard problem that you really can't solve unless you stay up all night. Because you have to have 1,000 things in your mind at one time. And to get all the pieces of the code to work. For me, it became a crazy making kind of occupation. I did it, but it's a young man's sport, young woman's sport, if you ask me. I've outgrown it. But while people are in that age, it's fun, it's worth doing. Don't let me stop you from doing it. It's a thrill. It's a thrill to do that kind of work. So I think it's a mixed bag. It's not just the corporate power abusing people. There's also a thrill of creation going on there, which I quite admire. Yeah, I think it's both and. So here's the challenge then. How do you be the type of business culture and manager who recognizes that for what it is and doesn't use it to take advantage of people? How do you do that? Because it is taking advantage of people, to some degree. And it's not just Amazon. You can find the same thing in all these high-tech companies. In fact, I've even used, in an ethics class last year, for my business ethics class, I used Uber as a case study on a final exam. And I gave my students a little article to read about Uber and how the value that is being espoused there is super pumped. And the value of super pumped means that I am just totally invested in gung-ho in this work to the exclusion of everything else. Well, to the exclusion of everything else is the problem. That's not healthy. So that's not a part of it that we admire. And I think what we need to do is help these companies learn how to put it in context and treat people like, a lot of it comes down to treating people like people and keeping an eye on that and not rewarding them for burning out, but rewarding them for keeping it in perspective. And one of the ways I want to try to do that, or I would recommend to companies to try to do that, is to deliberately spend intentional time together in community talking about the value and understanding the value of your community and the value of your relationship to your end user, wherever that looks like. That helps us put it in perspective. When we lose sight of those things, we lose sight of the relational side of what we're doing, that's when there's more of a tendency to become monomaniacal and go off the deep end in these other areas and burn out, in my opinion. So part of my research right now into communities of work actually is to research this and try to figure out how do companies build this sort of community of work and study it together and study the relationships together and make that a part of their reason for being. Some of my random observations on that. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm curious. Towards the beginning, you made a comment about some of the companies feeling almost like a Tower of Babel.
Yeah. That was my perspective as a critic.
No, but I'm curious. I'm curious. There's a lot of different tech companies out there. Some that I'd say some people look at and say, "Really, you're building a company around that?" But would you say there's some of these companies are inherently just prideful, and that Tower of Babel is part of their model, or is it more the people who are running them? And any other comments kind of on that?
Wow, what a great question. Because I think it's all of the above.
Okay.
And I think it's when they all get wrapped up together that that's when evil has a chance to sort of creep in and distort people's reality. They say, well, in a good and bad way, Steve Jobs had this gift of reality distortion field. And he used it in a very effective way. But my critique of the Tower of Babel, okay, so let me sum up your question. You gave several reasons why that happens. One is personal ego. Yes, that happens. Another is that they are trying to, in order to make money off of something, they have to pitch it in such a way that they make it sound as big as possible, and even bigger. And so it automatically gets vision cast as something that is unrealistic. It's something that is going to look like the tower. It's going to be this high. It's going to reach to the sky. It's going to grow to the sky. Invest now. Sorry, we can't take your money. We have all these other people in line. That's the way they raise money. The only way you can ever close a deal is to create a feeding frenzy where somebody's going to feel left out if they don't get in on the deal. That's when the deal closes. Because that's when you get people actually sign the checks. So there's this sort of built-in momentum to do that. But then here's a third reason, which is kind of a business model reason. Many of these business models are such that in order to succeed, they have to dominate. So the reason Apple Computer is dominant today is because they've managed to create an ecosystem which you need to be playing in if you want a piece of the pie. You have to play Apple's game. Okay? Very successful. That's why it's the most valuable company on earth today, because they've been able to dominate to that extent. Let me pick another example. Mark Zuckerberg is in a book, the book about his company, quoted as saying, forgive me for paraphrasing because I'm not reading this from notes, but basically gave a vision for what he was doing, that we are going to create a pipeline through which all the consciousness of all the people on earth will flow. Now, that's a pretty close paraphrase to the words that were used. You can read it in the book. When I read that, I go, no, you're not. Because I'm not going to put my consciousness through your pipe. Sorry. I mean, to me, that's a Tower of Babel right there. Just that somebody's wanting to build. Now, but one of the reasons of wanting to build it is because then if you can build something that's a platform that everybody has to use because you're the dominant platform, then you can start winning the business game by monetizing all those connections, by monetizing all those relationships. This is the part I don't like about it, because now your product is no longer focused on the product, it's rather focused on monetizing relationships, which is collateral damage waiting to happen. And if you look at the history of some of these companies and the way they've used relationships, there has been collateral damage, and it just keeps trickling out. And every time something goes wrong, they fix it. But that's one of the problem areas in some of these new technologies, just trying to basically monetize other people's information or other people's relationships. So those are some of the reasons that we end up with a Tower of Babel mentality. And of course there's idolatry in many ways, in many forms. I hope I did an adequate job with that. Okay. Yeah.
If you
Question
found
here
this
and then here.
study
Yeah.
in this notion, obviously we're talking about Silicon Valley, but the concepts aren't necessarily technology based. Have you seen this behavior exhibited in other places, in other spaces?
Well, I haven't done a good study to go looking for it, but I guess what you're asking is, where would be a place where you find something like Silicon Valley, only not applied to technology? Is that what you're asking? And
or could any company be like this? I mean,
I think Milan, Italy comes to mind, or Florence, Italy comes to mind, or for obvious reasons, arts and fashion, or Los Angeles for the performing arts, or New York, or I don't know. There's lots of artist enclaves in all kinds of places. That's a really interesting question. What comes to mind for you?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about this more
Yeah.
from the business model or just running a company, right? Because in some ways, this is a little bit, it's back to your geeked notion, right? If
Yeah.
I decided, I wanted to open the world's best pizza place
Yeah.
down the street from here, if I get enough people geeked about that and we build a vision, can't we do that, I maybe it's a bad example, but maybe you can see where I'm going. So it's
Oh yeah, I definitely think that what we're.
creation for the sake of creation.
Oh yeah.
Right, so.
Oh, I definitely think in teaching entrepreneurship, I don't presume that the technology in the Silicon Valley way is the definition of entrepreneurship. Not by a long shot. The person who starts the pizza shop, or the person who starts the fish market coffee shop, or whatever, whoever starts that is an entrepreneur. Absolutely. And I think a lot of the same sort of cultural and innovative things apply in both cases. Yeah, if that's what you're getting at. Yeah, sure. Let's see, there was a question here and then over. Go ahead.
I think you had one too.
Okay.
One of the trends in technology right now is this concept of big data and finding different ways to use big data. Two questions about that. One would be what sort of ethical things do we think we need to consider around that? And the other would be, do you feel like that in some ways is an opposition to this idea of creation and innovation, that you're just kind of taking existing stuff and monetizing it versus the traditional model of creating something new?
So this is a really good theme and your observation. I agree with your observation. There's a tendency built into big data to create to conjure up enough relationships that you can go monetize those relationships. Okay, now your instincts are there might be something wrong with that. My instincts say I want to look carefully at that, because here's where it crosses the line. It crosses the line when it begins to treat people like means rather than ends. It's very simple. I can say it simply. It's a lot harder to figure out where that line is when you're actually in business trying to do it. It gets really hard and it's really fuzzy. But I think that's the principle I want to try to use. So if my business model becomes one of trying to suck people in, gosh, I use these examples that you can maybe not be good examples, but Farmville, the game. It's a free game. Now, see, I'm speaking out of ignorance, speaking out of school, so I'm probably getting myself in trouble. So let me just confess right now, I've never played Farmville. But hypothetically speaking, let me pick a hypothetical example and just hypothetically presume that there was a game online that people could play, and it was just really kind of an addictive game, and it sucked them in. And then it popped up ads in their faces and told them that they could win the game better if they paid you money, or bought a cheat, or bought a character or something, and so you started taking money. Well, at some point, see, you can argue that both ways. You could say, well, I didn't force anybody to take my money. I didn't force anybody to give me their money. It's entertainment. I think that's a good argument. It's entertainment, and if I want to spend my money buying games, that's up to me. It's entertainment, fine. So I don't really know where the line is drawn. You see what I'm saying? It's hard to know where to draw the line, but at some point, I need to ask myself whether what I'm doing because of the purpose of promoting the human dignity and the delivery of a value to that person, or am I trying to monetize my access to that person? And that's where I try to figure out where to draw the line. And I think this is a great area rich for study right now, because we're opening up new examples of that every day, and we don't know. And big data does a ton of good. It cures disease, solves problems, it creates social ventures, it helps stamp out poverty through all kinds of ways by enabling people's productivity and talents. It's a huge asset. And at the same time, it's opening up these new areas where I start to wonder whether it's just existing for the sake of monetizing another human being. Question? Yeah.
Are there individuals, Christians perhaps, in Silicon Valley who are prophets, who are respected and listened to, and fight against the culture of
no one's a prophet in their own town. Yeah, no one's a prophet in their own town.
Okay.
Is one problem.
All right.
But yes, I certainly know high-tech Christian entrepreneurs there, and in Seattle both.
Yeah.
So the easy answer is yes. but I'm not prepared to start naming names. And it's hard for them to, it's very, very hard. I don't see any of them really doing it for the sake of the gospel in terms of proclamation. I don't really see that happening, no. It still seems out of place. It's much more quiet behind the scenes, getting to know people. I remember meeting one of my very best friends at Microsoft in Redmond, Washington. And I had been there for about 1.5 years and met a guy at church. And I said, "Don't you work at Microsoft?" I said, "What are you doing here?" You know, it was like one of those. And it became one of my best friends in life. And they're everywhere. But at work, they don't talk about it. That's my experience of the culture. They're there. I know they're there. Yeah.
That was mine too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I find this interesting, but to what extent do you think tech companies are unique in this regard? I think every company is looking to monetize relationships. It's just that big data people, I don't know, I don't see how they're different.
I think that's a very valid point. Every company has the potential to do that, to monetize a relationship, absolutely. I agree. So I don't believe I'm saying something really profound. I think all I'm really saying is that the new opportunities of big data create new opportunities on both sides of that. Wherever you draw the line, there's new ways to do it, for good or for not good.
I mean,
So
one thing I've always felt to be true, I'm not an entrepreneur myself, so I wouldn't know. It seems to me that one of the things that drives tech people is they do it because it's neat and because they can. They only ask questions later about whether it was worth doing. I think Wozniak was like that. He just loved this little thing.
Yeah.
He built the register. Just,
yeah.
And maybe that's something that's unique to tech. I don't know.
I think that is relatively unique to tech. I think there's definitely a tendency there. Again, Facebook comes to mind because Facebook has a culture of doing the hackathon.
Mm-hmm.
The hackathon is one of these like all-night coding fests where people get together and say, well, let's do something crazy new and invent something tonight, you know, and it's fun and exciting. But the only reason they're doing it is because it's new and exciting. They don't really have a user in mind when they're doing it. And so out of that comes sometimes new opportunities for the business that was not motivated by serving a user, actually. That can happen. And I think that's where some of the risk area comes in, ethically speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, so from what I understand, your thesis is like a lot of these 4 character attributes were, unique in founding the tech industry, and that has been critical to their success. But as I've just been thinking about this, it sounds a lot like Edison's General Electric kind of things,
Yeah.
very innovative, wanting to benefit
Right.
society. And I'm wondering, do you think that's going to keep happening, or do you think like as the industry becomes less of a new industry and settles down, as some of these companies get older, you have a huge first mover advantage with a lot of these kind of things?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think eventually that's going to change and they'll just become like normal companies, the GEs of the future, and these trades will?
Some of them will hope to become the GE of the future. Yeah, GE of the future is not so bad. But yeah, I do think that'll happen to some of them. But I also believe, just believe in my core, that the wave after wave of new technology, new generation doesn't stop. There's always going to be, that's always going to be happening in new ways, new forms, new places. I think Silicon Valley happens to be the huge shining light of that for the past 50 years. It could be somewhere else sometime. I think it's still Silicon Valley today, so it's had kind of a long run. And it's acquired such a huge momentum and infrastructure that now the infrastructure itself has such center of gravity, mass, that it's hard to duplicate. So it's not easy just to go out to replicate that. That only comes about through history and growth over time. So that's one aspect of it. But I'm very optimistic about our ability to solve the problems and about new technologies come along. I'm very optimistic about those things.
I guess my question should
Yeah.
be more full-fledged is, Did the creativity come from these 4 principles, or are these 4 principles just a natural outcome of, it's a new industry? Kind of a chicken and egg question.
I guess what I'm doing is standing back from it and just looking at what happened and trying to identify traits that I see. So I think that's like a chicken and egg question. I don't think I could I don't think I can separate them out. I think it's sort of like separating out the traits of human nature or something. It's a whole, and I'm just stepping back from it, looking at it, trying to identify what traits I see in it, in this phenomenon. I think I see these traits. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Starbucks. Do you know anything about Starbucks? They're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
They're huge.
Yeah.
Do they do this? I'm trying to think. Is there a non-tech company that?
Oh,
And it
sure.
seems like Starbucks.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
It
sure
might
they
be a
do.
good example of a
Sure they do.
non-tech.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I think that's a good example. I think I could go through.
There's all kinds of non-tech examples.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
so.
I think I could go through every one of these with Starbucks.
Is Seattle a Silicon Valley of thought?
Okay. Some of my colleagues have said, Bruce, you need to go write the one on Seattle.
Right.
I am amazed at Seattle.
Yeah.
Now, I landed there being a transplant a little over Microsoft is the reason I ended up there. I came from, before that I was at my company in San Diego County. And Microsoft brought me there. And Seattle, wow. Oh, by the way, the Seahawks are playing tonight. I'm like, no. I mean, Seattle has just had a lot going for it. Amazon, Microsoft, go back to the last century, UPS and Boeing. Amazing companies. Starbucks. I'm forgetting so many. I mean, there's just so many big high-tech companies growing up there now. And biotechnology is big there. So something's happening there as well.
We also have Shell Oil, North Dakota. All those tiny companies, 50 people, figuring out new ways to drill.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's human spirit. Jason.
I have a couple of questions to a couple of different themes that you've spoken to. One that I detected is it's really valuable to be in an organization where you've got good mentors, where they are building not just new technologies, but new ways of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any companies that you would commend to folks that are on the front end of their career and say, these folks are inventing a new way of doing business? That might be a good place to spend a couple of years. That's one question. The other question I have is, it seems like a major theme you've opened up here is this journey to the promised land, to build something new, not just not just a new enterprise, but a new way of organizing the enterprise.
Yeah, a new way of organizing, yeah.
Is it possible to reorganize an existing enterprise in a new way? And I don't mean technically possible, but do you really need to start a new company in order to have a new way of doing business?
To give a very short and overly simplistic answer, yeah, you have to start a new company. That's why there's a tradition of the skunk works in a big company. Lockheed was the original company, when the original skunk works was Lockheed. Huge company, unable to make this happen. But by spinning off basically a company inside the company they called the Skunk Works, they were able to do it. Intel, the book just came out based on the strategic wisdom of Andy Grove, Intel CEO. While I was there, it was Andy Grove. And Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. These three big tech entrepreneurs, strategic lessons, the book just came out this year. Can't remember the title of it, I could look it up. And Andy Grove is quoted in there about talking about cannibalism. He said, your job is to cannibalize your own company and your own success. So constant change. Microsoft, let me give you another example of how these companies have learned how to do this to themselves. They do have to spin off and create a new thing. So one way is by creating a new product group that competes with the existing product group. Apple Computer did that with parallel productions. Intel does it by cannibalizing whatever product they have. I worked at Microsoft. In the first 2 years I worked at Microsoft, I moved offices four times. In the first 2 years, I moved offices 4 times. My job didn't change, but Microsoft is constantly shuffling, rearranging, reorganizing. They're just constantly doing it. Like it's almost, it doesn't matter almost what the theory of the new organization is, almost doesn't seem to matter. It's just a reorganization, because as soon as you reorganize, what you do is you break open cracks for new things to happen, and they start happening. People are moved, they're with different people, they're working with different people, they have a new boss, they get transferred, they're in a new building, whatever it is. It's just constant change. And these companies have learned how to just sort of be in this mode of constant change and constantly ready for change. Yeah.
I like the way you're describing that. It raised a question for me about the relationship between that element of sort of how does a big business remain successful over the long term and human flourishing. Because almost all of human flourishing is about being embedded in communities and habits.
Yeah.
Which is the exact opposite.
It is.
And so I guess what I'm wondering then is that if that's the spirit of innovation, is that in fact incompatible with human flourishing, which depends on long-term embeddedness and habits?
But there's a trade-off there. So here's the magic way to do it then. The magic way would be to have this embedded sense of community of the whole, and within my work team to build strong relationships there, and have managers that understood that, managers who could build relationships, and then not go destroying those relationships willy-nilly, every 6 months just for the sake of destroying them. But when you do have to change, to have a sense of embedded community to the company as a whole because of shared values, and to understand what those shared values are. And I think the successful companies do have that, and they talk about it, and they put a lot of emphasis on spending time together and retreats and getting people to meet together, because it is a constant trade-off, as you say. Yeah, you're quite right. Well, yeah.
You talk about corporations and you talk about Silicon Valley. Is there any universality about this historically, or is this limited to this time, in our culture in this country, or maybe even in other countries today?
Well, I don't, I haven't been a good student of the long historical record of this phenomenon. So I don't trust that I have a good historical perspective in the long view. However, my belief is, and my instincts are, that yes, this has certainly happened elsewhere in other times. It'll happen again. It happened in Venice, Italy, 500 years ago, with a new form of trade and a new form of mercantilism, and new industry was invented, and new accounting was invented, and there was a flourishing. It happened in Florence, as I mentioned, in terms of arts and architecture and culture. It happened in Scotland with the Industrial Revolution and the tremendous inventiveness and things like the steam engine in the mills. It happened in England hundreds of years ago, so sort of the dawn of sort of the roots of modern capitalism. It happened at places like GE, like our friend here mentioned. So yeah, I think it's happened in Grand Rapids. I have no doubt. So people have come together, they've started something new, there's been a spin-off, there's an entrepreneurial spirit that takes hold. It may be affected by climate, culture, resources, whatever, but I think there's something just innately human about that happening. And I think Silicon Valley just happens to be the shining example that is so dominant in technology and is making so much money right now. Yeah, Jason.
I think that's actually a great place to wrap up for now. If people have further questions, then I trust Bruce will be available
Sure.
for a few minutes to answer those privately, but I hear both the Lions and the Seahawks are on tonight, so we should probably go ahead and wrap this up. Let's thank Bruce for coming.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Yeah. Cheers.